Young rich people mock a shabbily dressed man, unaware that it was Keanu Reeves in disguise. On that grey winter morning, the bus was following its usual route through the busy city streets. The passengers, absorbed in their own thoughts, barely noticed one another, each carrying the weight of yet another workday. The vehicle was particularly crowded, with people standing and balancing in the narrow aisles while others settled into the available seats. Then he boarded. A man with a simple appearance, dressed in worn-out clothes and carrying a cane, silently entered the bus. His eyes, deep and serene, revealed a dignity that contrasted with his modest looks. What no one suspected was that, beneath that carefully crafted disguise, was Keanu Reeves, one of Hollywood's most famous and beloved actors. The bus continued its journey, and the passengers remained immersed in their routines when jovial and carefree voices began to echo down the aisle. A group of 4 teenagers, all dressed in branded clothing and carrying expensive backpacks, had just boarded. Their faces displayed that typical confidence of those who never had to worry about financial hardships. The tallest among them, wearing a backwards cap, was the first to notice the presence of the simple man. His eyes sparkled with a mix of amusement and disdain as he nudged his friends, discreetly pointing at the new target of their teasing. The group moved closer, positioning themselves strategically around the seat where Keanu was seated. "Look at that. He must have escaped. From a museum or something, huh?" mocked the cap-wearing guy, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The laughter of the other teenagers quickly followed, echoing through the bus like sharp knives cutting through the morning air. A second young man, wearing a grey hoodie, stepped even closer. With a deliberate movement, he prodded Keanu's cane with the tip of his designer sneaker. "Is that cane just to keep you from falling, or to remind you that you have nothing?" he teased, drawing more laughter from his companions. The other passengers watched the scene with a mix of discomfort and apprehension. Some averted their gaze, embarrassed by the situation, while others whispered among themselves, yet no one dared to intervene. The silence of the onlookers only emboldened the young people, who felt increasingly at ease to continue their taunts. Keanu, however, maintained his unshakable calm. His eyes remained fixed on the scenery passing by the window, as if the cruel words of the teenagers could not touch him. This apparent calm only served to further intrigue the young ones, who couldn't understand how someone could remain so impassive in the face of their mockery. The taunts continued to escalate until one of the boys, already impatient with the man's lack of reaction, raised his voice even more. "Hey, old man, do you have a problem with that? You want us to throw a party with your poor man's feathers?" It was at that moment that something shifted in the bus's atmosphere. A heavy silence fell, as if all the passengers had simultaneously held their breath. The laughter of the young people began to sound less confident, a touch of nervousness seeping into their formerly assured voices. Slowly, Keanu lifted his face and fixed his gaze directly into the eyes of the young man who had made the latest taunt. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low yet firm, imbued with a natural authority that came not from power or money, but from wisdom and life experience. The first chapter ended with that moment of tension, with the bus passengers as silent, witnesses to an encounter that promised to be much more significant than anyone could have imagined on that grey winter morning. "Do you think you're having fun at my expense?" Keanu's voice echoed throughout the bus, calm and penetrating. "But know that what I carry with me goes far beyond the clothes I wear. Every wrinkle, every scar, every story told by these eyes is the result of a life lived with dignity and challenges you could never imagine facing." His words hung in the air like the morning mist, enveloping not only the 4 young people, but all the bus passengers. The cap-wearing guy, who moments before had exuded so much confidence, now kept his eyes fixed on the floor, his restless hands nervously adjusting the accessory on his head. The ensuing silence was deafening. The other 3 teenagers exchanged uncertain looks, as if for the first time they realized the weight of their actions. The young man in the grey hoodie, who had earlier prodded the cane with disdain, took a step back, his formerly defiant posture now replaced by visible discomfort. The other passengers, who had until then been watching the scene with a mix of shame and impotence, now observed with renewed interest. There was something about that man's presence, something in his silent dignity that transcended his simple appearance and touched something deep in every person present. "Maybe we went too far," murmured the cap-wearing guy, his voice almost inaudible amid the noise of the bus engine. His words, though whispered, carried the weight of recognition, the first crack in a facade of arrogance that had seemed impenetrable until then. Keanu continued looking at the young people, but now his gaze had softened. There was no anger in his expression, only a profound and compassionate understanding that made the teenagers feel even more uneasy about their previous actions. It was as if, for the first time, they were truly seeing the person behind the worn-out clothes, looking beyond the appearances they had so mercilessly mocked. The bus continued its journey through the city, but something fundamental had changed inside it. The other passengers, once tense and apprehensive, now wore thoughtful expressions, as if they too were reflecting on their own lives and prejudices. Some older people nodded discreetly in silent approval of the man's words. The four young people stayed together, but their posture had completely changed. The air of superiority that once surrounded them had dissipated, replaced by a budding humility that made them seem smaller in their expensive uniforms and designer sneakers. "True wealth," Keanu continued, his voice now softer, "is not in what we own, but in what we are able to give to others. It is not in the clothes we wear, but in the way we treat those who cross our path." The words struck deep into the hearts of the teenagers. The young man who had made the last taunt before the confrontation now had teary eyes, visibly struggling against the emotions that threatened to overflow. When the bus stopped at the next stop, the four young people got off in silence, but not before casting one last look at the man who had transformed their ordinary morning into a life lesson. Their steps on the sidewalk no longer carried the same arrogance as before. There was a new weight on their shoulders, the weight of the knowledge that comes with awareness. The other passengers began to disembark as well, each carrying with them a piece of that extraordinary experience. Some smiled discreetly, others seemed lost in deep thought, but all had been touched in some way by the unexpected encounter that morning. Keanu remained seated, his gaze once again turned to the window, watching the city parade by outside. His disguise remained the same, but now the few passengers who stayed on the bus looked at him with reverent respect, understanding that sometimes the greatest life lessons can come from the most unexpected places. The days that followed the encounter on the bus brought subtle but profound changes in the lives of the four teenagers. The cap-wearing guy, who had once led the taunts so effortlessly, now walked the school corridors with a thoughtful air, as if bearing the weight of a revelation he couldn't share with anyone. During school breaks, the group used to gather in the same spot, a privileged area of the courtyard they had practically claimed as their own territory. However, their conversations were no longer the same. The bus incident had planted a seed of unrest in their young spirits, a consciousness that refused to sleep. "Have you ever thought," began the young man in the grey hoodie, fiddling distractedly with the zipper of his sweatshirt, "how many times we've done something like this without even realizing it?" His question hung in the air like a heavy cloud, provoking an uncomfortable silence among his friends. The other three fidgeted uneasily, each lost in their own memories. Moments of arrogance, derisive laughter, hurtful comments. Everything now seemed different under the light of that transformative morning. The busman, with his silent dignity, had become a mirror in which they were forced to see their own distorted reflections. One day during lunch, the group witnessed a scene that would have previously gone unnoticed, or worse, served as fodder for jokes. A cleaning staff member accidentally dropped her lunch container on the cafeteria floor. Before anyone could react, the cap-wearing guy rose from his table and approached to help. His friends watched surprised, as he not only helped clean up but also offered money for her to buy another meal. The staff member, initially suspicious of this unexpected kindness, ended up accepting the gesture with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, my child," she said, her voice choked with emotion. The gesture did not go unnoticed by the other students at school. Some watched with curiosity, others with disbelief. But something was definitely changing. The group that had once been known for its arrogance was now beginning to be seen in a new light. At home, families also noticed differences in the behavior of the young people. The young man in the grey hoodie surprised his parents by asking to visit the employees who worked in the family business. "I want to get to know the people who make everything work," he explained, to everyone's astonishment. During a particularly reflective afternoon, the four friends met at a cafe near the school. Between cups of hot chocolate and conversations deeper than they had ever shared, they began to plan ways to make a difference. "That man on the bus," one of them remarked, "he talked about challenges we can't even imagine facing. Maybe it's time we try to understand these challenges better." The others agreed, feeling that something greater was emerging from that conversation. The young man who had made the last taunt on the bus took out his cell phone and began researching social projects in the region. To his surprise, he discovered that there was an entire world of needs and opportunities for help that had always been there, invisible to his privileged eyes. As the afternoon progressed and the sun began to set, the four friends remained absorbed in their discussion, planning actions and sharing ideas. The encounter with that mysterious man had awakened something within them, a social awareness that now demanded action. On the way home, each of them observed the city with different eyes. The people on the streets were no longer just extras in their privileged lives, but protagonists of their own stories, each carrying their own struggles and dignity. 2 weeks after the incident on the bus, unexpected news shook social media. Keanu Reeves had been in town during that period, discreetly participating in social actions and visiting charitable institutions. The revelation hit the four friends like a bomb, and they immediately began piecing together the puzzle. The cap-wearing guy was the first to make the connection. While browsing the internet, he found a photo of the actor in one of his most casual moments, and the resemblance with the busman was unmistakable. His hand trembled as he showed the image to his friends during a school break. "It can't be," murmured the young man in the grey hoodie, his eyes wide with recognition. The realization of what had really happened that morning hit the group like a wave, intensifying the impact of that experience. Yet the most surprising thing was not the identity of the mysterious man, but how this revelation affected the young people. Instead of boasting about having encountered a celebrity or trying to draw attention to the incident, they kept the discovery among themselves, understanding that the true value of that encounter lay in the lesson learned. The group began to involve itself in social projects, initially in a discreet and timid manner. The young man who had made the last taunt on the bus discovered a nearby senior shelter and started making regular visits. His friends, inspired by his initiative, soon joined him. During one of those visits, they encountered an elderly gentleman carrying a cane very similar to the one they had mocked on the bus. The man shared stories of his life, speaking about dignity and overcoming obstacles, inadvertently echoing Keanu's words. The young people listened with a respect that, just weeks before, they would have deemed impossible. The transformation of the four friends began to influence other students at the school. The group that had once been known for its arrogance was now becoming an example of positive change. Other students, curious about this new attitude, started to approach and take an interest in the social projects. One day, while organizing a T-Buy coat drive for homeless people, the cap-wearing guy came across an article about Keanu Reeves. The piece discussed how the actor used to make anonymous donations and participate in social actions without seeking recognition. "He didn't do that on the bus to shame us," the young man reflected. "He did it to teach us." News of his charitable actions spread throughout the school, attracting more and more students eager to participate. The group, which had once used its influence to intimidate, now used it to mobilize people around important causes. During a particularly busy afternoon of volunteer work, the four friends found themselves watching the sunset from the same cafe where they had begun planning their actions. The young man in the grey hoodie broke the contemplative silence. "You know what's amazing? It took a famous actor disguising himself as an ordinary person to make us see the value of ordinary people." The others nodded, understanding the depth of that observation. The irony did not escape any of them. They had mocked a man for his simple appearance, only to discover he was a celebrity, but the true lesson was not in the revelation of his identity, but in understanding that human dignity transcends any social status. That night, as they returned to their homes, each of the young people carried with them not only the memory of that transformative encounter, but also the certainty that their lives had changed forever. The mysterious man on the bus, Keanu Reeves, had planted a seed of transformation that was now blossoming in ways they could never have imagined. 6 months had passed since that grey morning on the bus. Winter had given way to spring, and with it the seeds of change planted during that unlikely encounter had blossomed. The 4 young people, who were once known for their arrogance, now stood out for something completely different: their ability to inspire and mobilize others. The project that began with simple visits to a senior shelter had expanded into a network of charitable actions involving dozens of students. The cap-wearing guy, who had once led the taunts, now coordinated a group of volunteers offering tutoring in public schools in the region. His transformation was so remarkable that even the most skeptical teachers had to acknowledge that the change was genuine. On one especially significant afternoon, the 4 friends met again at the same bus stop where it had all begun. The young man in the grey hoodie carried a local newspaper featuring a report on the impact of the social actions led by the students. The article did not mention the incident with Keanu Reeves, a secret the 4 had decided to keep, but it highlighted how a small group of young people had managed to mobilize an entire community. "It feels strange to be here again," one of them commented, watching the passing buses. "It seems like it was another lifetime." The others nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. That bus stop had become a milestone in their lives, a turning point between who they were and who they had become. The young man who had made the last taunt that morning took a small wooden cane out of his pocket, similar to the one Keanu had carried. "I bought this to remind me," he explained to his friends, "not of the moment when we were cruel, but of the moment we learned to see beyond appearances." As they talked, they noticed an elderly gentleman approaching the stop, walking with difficulty. Without hesitation, the 4 moved to help him, offering support and a place to sit. The gesture, now so natural, would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The elderly man, surprised by the kindness, began to share his stories, speaking of his life and the daily hardships he faced. The young people listened with genuine interest, asking questions and demonstrating a respect that went beyond mere courtesy. It was as if the universe had prepared that moment to show just how much they had changed. A week later, the group organized a charity event at school. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and community members. On stage, the 4 friends shared their stories of transformation, not mentioning the encounter with Keanu, but emphasizing how small moments can completely change our perspective on life. "We learned that true wealth is not in what we own," said the cap-wearing guy, his voice filled with emotion, "but in the ability to see the value in every person who crosses our path." At the end of the event, while helping to organize the space, they found an anonymous envelope. Inside was only a handwritten note. "True transformation happens when we allow our experiences to teach us to be better. Keep spreading kindness." There was no signature, but the 4 immediately recognized the handwriting. It was the same person who had changed their lives that morning on the bus. The note was never shown to anyone other than the 4 friends. They understood that this message was more than just encouragement. It was a reminder that the greatest lessons in life sometimes come in disguise, whether in the form of a world-famous actor dressed as an ordinary person, or in the form of a moment of humility that forces us to question everything we thought we knew. The story of that morning on the bus remained a secret among them, but its effects continued to multiply through their actions. Every person touched by their projects, every life impacted by their change in attitude, was part of a larger legacy, a legacy that began with an unexpected encounter on a grey winter morning, when 4 arrogant young people learned that true greatness lies in the ability to look beyond appearances and treat every person with the dignity they deserve.